You dumb black bitch, sit! He snarled those 6 words like a slap across history. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She didn't speak. She opened a manila folder, and every man in that room leaned back like it was a weapon. Inside, one contract, one signature, one number. $775 per child, per night, for a metal bed, a foil blanket, and a concrete floor. Over 14,000 children over 46 nights. Over $500 million in taxpayer money. But what shattered the room wasn't the math. It was the name on the payment memo. And what came next wasn't politics. It was reckoning. By the time she finished, even the cameras stopped blinking. Because sometimes justice doesn't need to scream. It just needs someone brave enough to read out loud. The door didn't creak. It opened with the hush of intention. Jasmine Crockett didn't stride in. She arrived, the kind of entrance that doesn't need noise to announce it. Her heels didn't click like fashion. They struck the marble floor like countdowns. 4 deliberate taps toward destiny. She didn't look left, didn't look right. She looked through the room, through the performance, the posture, the pretense. There were no notes in her hand, no rehearsed speech, only one manila folder, thin and unassuming, yet somehow heavier than truth itself. Trump was already seated, slouched, smug, surrounded by allies wrapped in the false armor of political theater. Reverend Matt Gaetz leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, chewing gum like it was policy. Senator Bob Bober whispered something crude behind a crooked smile. Laughter flickered like static. They thought they were still in control. They thought Jasmine Crockett was just another angry woman playing pretend in a man's room. They were wrong, and Jasmine didn't have to tell them. She showed them. She reached the center table without a word, placed the folder before her like a relic. Then, without warning, slid it across the polished oak with 2 fingers. A slow glide, perfectly centered, as if guided by gravity itself. It stopped right in front of Donald J. Trump, who looked down, bemused. No one else moved. Not a single aide shuffled a paper. Not a single chair creaked. The silence was surgical, tense, waiting to be torn open. The red tally light on the C-SPAN camera flicked once, then locked on. That's when Jasmine sat down. Not slouched, not posed. She anchored herself. She tapped the mic once. A half-second buzz, then stillness. Then finally her voice, measured, level, and cold enough to slice through steel. Let the record reflect. This hearing will begin with a name. She reached into the folder, not with flair but with precision, and pulled out a photograph. She held it high. Her hand did not shake. The image faced the panel, then turned toward the camera. The nation. A little girl, maybe 6, maybe younger. Brown eyes wide, hair matted, lips cracked. A red rubber band barely holding her ponytail in place. Her name was Lucia Ortega, and she died in a detention cell, 47 minutes after guards were told she couldn't breathe. No medical staff arrived. No ambulance came. Only silence. Trump's scoff cut across the table like a razor, smug and venomous. This is what we're starting with? Emotional manipulation? Jasmine didn't look at him, didn't blink, didn't acknowledge the venom. Instead, she reached into the folder again and produced a second document, this one bound in blue government issue cover. She slid it across the table, this time slower, this time with the weight of the dead. It landed with a soft thud, but it sounded like thunder. Facility fee schedule, she said. ICE Youth Detention Services. A highlighted line, line 42, $775 per child, per night. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. This agreement, she continued, was signed between the Department of Homeland Security and UltraCorp, a private contractor approved under your administration, Mr. Trump. Lucia died on night 3. That's $2,325 taxpayer dollars for a child who suffocated behind a steel door. A murmur rose in the gallery. Trump leaned forward. The grin was gone. Jasmine stayed steady. You want to talk about political theater? she said, her voice like glass underfoot. I'm talking about a price tag on a child's life. She flipped to page 7 and pointed to the bottom right corner. Your signature's here. Black ink, presidential seal, dated, verified. No one in the room exhaled. Then came the silence, but not the passive kind. This silence leaned forward. It watched, it judged, it pierced through suits and sound bites. And that's when the light shifted. Not on the cameras, but in the room. Like a storm rolling in behind the curtain of civility. Lawmakers adjusted in their chairs, suddenly unsure if the seats were as safe as they once believed. Staffers whispered, pens froze mid-word. Somewhere, someone at the back of the room mouthed the word indictable. Jasmine didn't press the advantage. She didn't gloat. She just turned to the next page. This isn't just a contract. It's a ledger of suffering. She tapped a new section. Over 14,820 minors, held for an average of 46 nights. At $775 per child per night, the total cost exceeded $527 million. More than $500 million, she said, and not one child guaranteed soap, sunlight, or safety. Trump didn't respond. His jaw tightened, one hand clenched against the table, the other searching for a response that wouldn't come. And still, Jasmine didn't look at him, because this wasn't about him anymore. This was about us, about a country that had grown too comfortable turning children into line items. She closed the folder, not gently, not violently, just finally, and the room still didn't breathe, because the folder wasn't just a document, it was a confession, one the nation had refused to write until now. Because sometimes all it takes to bring a legacy to its knees is a woman unafraid to open the wrong file in the right room. She didn't pause, didn't bask in the discomfort she'd ignited. Jasmine Crockett simply turned the page, her hand steady, her voice soft as steel. Line 42, she said again, $775 per child per night. The number didn't echo. It settled, like lead in the lungs of everyone present. One line, buried in a contract no one thought the public would ever read. One number that stripped innocence of its name and replaced it with a billing code. Jasmine looked up, not at Trump, not at the committee, but at the space between them, where truth had started to leak through the seams of power. Let's stop pretending this was oversight, she said. This was invoice. A whisper moved across the room like wind through broken glass. No one wanted to speak, but no one could unhear it. $775 wasn't the cost of care. It wasn't for medicine, for safety, for dignity. It was the going rate to cage a child behind chain-link fences, under fluorescent lights, with nothing but a foil blanket and a number stapled to their file. Then she said her name. Not Trump's. Lucia Ortega, 6 years old, brown skin, dull eyes, a child who still colored with broken crayons, who liked red rubber bands and whispered her mother's name when she slept. Lucia didn't make it to night 4. She died 47 minutes after struggling to breathe in a facility with no on-site medical staff, no immediate response protocol, and no functional heating system. And still, the government billed taxpayers $775 for night 1, $775 for night 2, $775 for the night she died. Jasmine didn't cry. She didn't need to. Her words had already drawn blood. Trump exhaled with a scoff so loud it cracked the silence. This is what we're starting with, he muttered. Emotional manipulation, and he said it like a spell meant to undo reality. Like if he said it out loud enough, the room would go back to pretending this was politics as usual. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Her eyes remained locked on the committee. No, Mr. Trump, she replied. This is not emotion, it's arithmetic. And then she turned to the projection screen. With a nod, a DHS invoice filled the wall behind her. Towering, raw, and sterile, it looked like any other federal expenditure. Rows of numbers, columns of codes, dry summaries. Except this one didn't list office chairs or catering services. It listed 14,820 children, held for 46 nights, billed at $775 per head per night. Total cost, Jasmine read aloud, $527,250,000. The number dropped like a gavel, but it wasn't justice that followed. It was paralysis. We didn't fund care, she said. We funded cages. And someone made a fortune. Behind her, the screen zoomed in, highlighting a single redacted field labeled bonus allocation. Jasmine tapped it with her pen. This line item doesn't refer to beds or blankets, she said. It refers to shareholder payout, performance-based profit tied directly to occupancy rate. Trump's smile twisted. Less amusement now, more defense mechanism. He shifted in his chair, leaned forward, and muttered again, louder this time. Standard logistics, beds, meals, facility costs. But Jasmine was ready. So you're saying, she asked, that nearly $500 million for children sleeping on concrete, without soap, without sunlight, and without medical care, is standard logistics? A chair creaked. Someone in the gallery cleared their throat. Not because they disagreed, but because the truth was starting to suffocate. Jasmine turned back to the audience, not just the lawmakers, but the American people watching on television, streaming on devices, reading captions with held breath. We didn't lose our way, she said. We priced it. Then she did something no one expected. She reached into her folder and pulled out a colored billing chart from UltraCorp's internal system. Bright bars, smiling branding, a legend in the corner marked occupancy yield versus profit curve. This is what they use, she said, to optimize the suffering of children. The chart showed that longer stays equaled higher returns. Children who remained detained beyond 15 days generated 20% more margin. Internal codes listed detainees not by name, but by profit band. T1, teen male, T1, high yield. N2, toddler, female, premium adjustment. S3, sibling cluster. Bonus eligible. She pointed to a cell labeled about the Lucia Ortega, N2. She didn't die from policy, Jasmine said. She died from profit. And with that sentence, the mask cracked. Across the aisle, a Republican aide dropped his tablet. On the other end, a C-SPAN producer whispered, "Zoom in." Staffers shifted in their seats like children caught cheating. But it wasn't shame that filled the air. It was exposure. Jasmine stood tall, her voice calm. No volume spike, no theatrics. This wasn't immigration enforcement. It was a revenue stream with barbed wire. No one corrected her, because in that moment, there was nothing left to say. Only the number 775 and a girl named Lucia who never made it home. Jasmine didn't need to raise her voice because the paper was already screaming. Slowly, deliberately, she reached once more into the folder. This time, she didn't pull out a photograph or a billing chart. What she held up now was far more dangerous than an image. It was authorization. It was permission. It was proof. Page 7, she said calmly, of the ICE Ultra contract. She placed the page beneath the overhead camera. The live feed zoomed in, catching every detail. The header read, Department of Homeland Security Contract numbered ICE 7843 EXD, and at the bottom, centered in bold, unmistakable ink, Donald J. Trump, typed, signed and dated. The camera didn't cut away. Neither did Jasmine. Her finger hovered just above the signature line, then dropped once, a tap that reverberated like a bullet casing hitting marble. Is this your signature, Mr. Trump? A silence fell, not of stillness, but of suspense. A collective breath held between exposure and denial. Trump leaned forward, eyes narrowing. That's a routine approval, he said, his tone flat but agitated. Presidents sign off on hundreds of contracts. I don't read every line. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, not with surprise but precision. So you're saying you approved a $500 million contract authorizing child detention incentives, and you didn't read it? Trump adjusted his cuff. His face, once adorned with his signature smirk, was now tense. The lines around his mouth pulled inward, not from confusion but calculation. He glanced at one of his aides. No one moved. Jasmine stepped forward, not physically but rhetorically. Mr. Trump, line 42 outlined a profit-based yield structure tied directly to per-head occupancy rates. Page 5 detailed performance bonuses based on retention brackets. Page 6 authorized funding for expedited capacity expansion. And page 7, she tapped again, bears your name. Trump scoffed. Too loud, too sudden. That's bureaucracy, logistics, soap, food beds. That's what that is. But Jasmine didn't even blink. Soap? She repeated. Lucia Ortega didn't have soap. She didn't have a nurse. She didn't have oxygen. But the invoice had her name and a dollar sign. So tell me, where was the logistics when she died in your cage? A low murmur rippled through the gallery. This wasn't a political exchange anymore. It was cross-examination. And the defendant was starting to realize it. Jasmine looked back down at the contract, then slowly lifted the page and turned it toward the panel, toward the country. This isn't a memo. It's not an order. It's a signature. And it carries weight. She held it there, not long, just enough. Long enough for the C-SPAN camera to freeze the frame, for millions watching to screenshot, repost, dissect. Every system needs consent, she said. This was yours. Trump shifted again. His fingers tapped the table faster now, nervous rhythm disguised as indifference. His counsel leaned in, whispering something behind a hand. He didn't respond, because there was no line to walk anymore. Jasmine had lit the whole page on fire, and all he had was smoke. You approved a contract, she continued, that turned undocumented children into revenue units. A contract that used phrases like occupancy leverage and average length maximization. That wasn't oversight. That was strategy. Trump's eyes flared, but he didn't speak. His silence wasn't strength. It was cornered fury. Jasmine placed the page back in the folder as gently as she'd taken it out. This is what happens, she said, when power signs the bottom line and never looks at the top one. The screen behind her switched to another slide, this time a memo. Internal language from Altracorp, marked confidential, displayed phrases like optimize intake versus fixed cost, child volume predictability, and worst of all, mortality margin. Gasps broke through the room. Audible now, human, Jasmine pointed without emotion. That memo was issued 12 days after this contract was signed, the same week Lucia Ortega died. Trump's jaw clenched so tightly the tension was visible on camera. His hand curled slightly into a fist. But Jasmine didn't press further. She simply let the paper do the talking. Because that's what she'd said all along. No theatrics, no shouting. Let the document speak. Let the numbers bleed. Let the signature hang. It's always quiet at first, she said, voice soft. Prophets don't make noise until they echo. And in that room, the echo had finally arrived. Not as a chant, not as a protest, but as a reckoning, wearing a tailored navy suit and holding one page at a time like sacred text. She returned to her seat. Trump remained frozen. Somewhere in the gallery, a woman clutched a photo of a child. Somewhere outside, the world was starting to read page 7 for the first time. Because the truth wasn't buried. It was filed. And now, it was wide open. The room didn't recover. It merely held its breath longer. And then Jasmine spoke 3 words that cracked the silence clean down the middle. Let's play footage. There was no warning, no build-up, just a screen behind her, flickering to life, blooming from black into a muted green hue, grainy with timestamp and security header. A new setting. No longer fluorescent lighting and cold metal desks. Now it was opulence. A chandelier shimmered off polished mahogany, velvet curtains, gold accents, a private room in Mar-a-Lago 2019. The caption read, Private Strategy Session, ICE Operational Briefing. The room in the video was full, half-empty glasses on silver trays, hors d'oeuvres untouched. Laughter murmured beneath the clink of cutlery. No one wore a tie, but everyone wore power like skin. In the center of the frame sat Donald J. Trump, blazer off, sleeves rolled up, drink in hand. His posture was relaxed, too relaxed. He wasn't testifying, he was boasting. And then the sentence, the one that would haunt the chamber. The one Jasmine had waited for the country to hear without spin or excuse. More kids, more funding, he said, swirling his drink with 2 fingers. That's capitalism, sweetheart, he chuckled. And so did the men around him. The audience in the hearing didn't gasp. They didn't move. They froze as if struck by a blunt force made entirely of words. One woman in the second row covered her mouth with both hands. Her body trembled. A quiet, unshakable sob broke through her teeth. She didn't make a sound, but everyone heard her. On screen, Trump kept speaking. They panic when we get tough, but that panic fills the beds. Beds full, bonuses all around. He lifted his glass. They toasted, laughing, casual, like they were discussing stocks, not children. Inside the hearing chamber, the oxygen seemed thinner. Jasmine didn't speak. She let the footage roll, not for drama, for evidence. Turn off the faucet, Trump continued, and suddenly everyone's whining about oversight. But when the fear is high, the funding flows smooth. The video paused on his face, mid-smirk. The freeze frame sat like a slap across every television screen in America. Jasmine finally stood. Her voice didn't rise. It lowered, the kind of quiet that commands the room. That wasn't a leaked memo. That was a strategy session. The children weren't burdens. They were inventory. Fear was the fuel, and profit was the product. A senator on the far left leaned forward, visibly rattled. A staffer dropped his pen. Cameras zoomed in slowly, not on Jasmine, not even on Trump, but on the video frame. That one line, frozen in time, typed into the closed captioning bar. That's capitalism, sweetheart. She stepped closer to the table now, as if delivering the final page of a sermon written in fire. This wasn't about national security. This was about supply and demand. More crossings meant more cages. More cages meant more contracts. And more contracts meant bonuses for the very people clinking glasses behind that door. Trump's counsel opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The usual objections had died in the echo of that tape. No legal framing could unring that bell. The policy didn't fail, Jasmine continued. It succeeded in doing exactly what it was built to do, to monetize misery, to turn panic into payroll and children into profit margins. Behind her, the video had faded to black, but the weight of it hadn't left. It lingered in every line on every face in that room. Even Trump had stopped shifting. He sat still now, not like a man calm and control, but like someone trying not to sink deeper into the chair. And then Jasmine changed tone, almost imperceptibly. It softened, not to spare them, but to draw them in. How many children does it take to reach $1 million, she asked. No one answered. At 775 that night, how many broken families did it take to build that chandelier? Still silence. She leaned in slightly, her eyes fierce but not theatrical, locked on the faces across from her. They thought this conversation would stay behind closed doors, in shadowed rooms with soft drinks and hard decisions. But now the shadows have names and receipts. A staffer in the back wiped his face with a shaking hand. Another whispered urgently to a colleague. But Jasmine stayed centered, the eye of a storm that had turned quiet and deadly. When a leader lifts a glass to child detention and calls it capitalism, we are not debating immigration. We are confronting depravity. She paused. And that is not partisan. That is not left or right. That is American rot. And today we cut it open. The room didn't explode. It sank, slowly, deeply into the kind of reckoning only facts could deliver. And as the final seconds of silence settled, Jasmine stepped back once more. The tape had ended, but the voices, the ones from the shadows, they had only just begun to speak. The side door creaked open, not loud but deliberate, like history choosing to enter on quiet feet. A woman walked in, no security detail, no thick binder in her arms, No polished PR smile, just a weathered blouse, a trembling breath, and eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in months. Her name was Elena Morales. Her former title, Chief Financial Officer, Ultra Corporation. The committee clerk asked the formal question, "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" Elena didn't hesitate. "I do." Her voice was steady, but her fingers, gripping the table's edge, betrayed a different truth, one that had lived in silence too long. Jasmine didn't lean forward. She didn't interrupt or dramatize. She simply nodded. A silent invitation. "It's your turn now." Elena cleared her throat once, then began. "I was hired to manage cost flow and billing operations for Ultra's government contracts, specifically ICE retention logistics." She paused, long enough to gauge the room, long enough to feel the weight of what she was about to say land squarely on her own spine. "I was told not to track children by name, only by unit code. N2, toddler, T3, teen, S1, sibling group, A4, adolescent male. They weren't detainees, they were, occupancy." The murmur started again, this time deeper. Not just shock, but shame. From the back of the room, someone whispered, "Jesus Christ," and no one told them to quiet down. Elena pressed on. Each child had a retention value, a dollar range. The longer they stayed, the higher their cumulative value. We were instructed to flag those with the highest profit per diem. She reached slowly into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not a report, not an exhibit, a photo. She placed it on the table. The camera zoomed in automatically. 6 steel beds, thin blankets, a fluorescent light hanging crooked. In each bed, a child curled like laundry in cold air. "That was Unit 4B, Elena said softly. "We called it the Vault. Highest return unit in the facility. They never left before day 15. Jasmine's face didn't move, but her fingers gripped the table just a little tighter. Trump, on the other hand, was losing control of his mask. He leaned to his lawyer, whispered furiously, then leaned back, arms crossed, lips clenched. His silence now felt like something pressed against the walls, trying not to burst. Elena continued. "We logged medical surcharges even when there were no doctors, bedding fees when there were no mattresses. We rounded up on retention counts. If a child disappeared from the log, we labeled it transferred, whether we knew where they went or not." A collective breath left the room. It wasn't disbelief, it was recognition. Jasmine leaned in softly now, cutting through the numbness like a whisper through fog. "Ms. Morales, when did you first raise concerns?" Elena didn't blink. "April 2020. I sent an internal report to the Ultra Compliance team, flagging the false surcharges and occupancy coding. 48 hours later, my access was revoked. My office reassigned. I was told, quote, 'Stop acting like you're here to save anyone.'" She paused, then added more quietly, "They made me sign an NDA, but they forgot I kept copies." She reached into her bag and slid a thin file across the table to Jasmine. It wasn't big, but it didn't have to be, because the first document inside bore the letterhead, Office of the President, Internal Review, and the subject line, Operational Profit Summary, Migrant Youth Division. Jasmine held it up. The camera zoomed. The silence bent under its weight. "This document," she said, "connects the detention line items directly to financial performance benchmarks tied to executive bonuses." Then she turned to Elena. "Who signed this?" Elena looked down, then up. Her voice, still calm, held a knife. "Mark Meadows, Jared Kushner, and Donald J. Trump." A single audible gasp came from the gallery. Trump didn't move. But something had changed. It wasn't the revelation. It was the undeniability of it. The file was real. The signature was legible. The profit model was mapped line by line on the backs of children who never even had soap. Jasmine looked at the document one last time, then placed it down, centered, framed it with her hands like something sacred or toxic. "No more whispers," she said. "This is what the silence was hiding. She nodded toward Elena, not as a gesture of thanks, but of solidarity, then turned back toward the room. And that's the thing about shadows, she said. They only win when the truth is too scared to walk in. Today it had, and her name was Elena Morales. Jasmine paused, not for dramatic effect, but for air, for gravity, for the weight of 112 names that no longer appeared in any system. Then she reached beneath the evidence tray and pulled out a flash drive. "I'd like to submit a new exhibit," she said, "obtained under federal subpoena from a surveillance unit near the Laredo ICE facility, footage time-stamped 3 days after its official closure." She plugged the device in, the screen flickered, and then, grainy and low-lit, the night appeared. A narrow back alley, a detention center that looked deserted, its signage already stripped, windows dark. But there was motion. A white unmarked box truck backing into a loading dock. 2 men in black uniforms, no name tags, no identifiable insignia, unloading boxes, dozens of them. Each one stamped internal, classified. No voices, only the soft, mechanical hum of industrial shredders. The camera, likely hidden in a rooftop vent across the alley, caught the entire sequence. Page after page being fed into teeth of steel. Cross-cut confetti of forms, documents, ledgers. One man pauses, checks a list on a clipboard, nods, and tosses another stack inside. "This," Jasmine said quietly, "was 2 nights after the facility was decommissioned, and 2 weeks after 112 children were declared transferred." She looked back at the room. Transferred to where? No facility received them, no family claimed them, no exit records, no bus manifests, just blank cells in a database. The chamber went still, again. Not shocked this time. Sick. Jasmine clicked her remote. A new slide appeared, a DHS spreadsheet projected in crisp grayscale. Each row represented a minor in federal custody, name, age, intake date, facility code, transfer status. But in column 6, under destination, there was nothing but a dash, row after row, missing, missing, missing. And then she scrolled. "These aren't just missing entries," she said. "These are missing children. 112, ages 4 to 17, all lost during a 5-day transition window between administrative handovers. And after that, no trace, no calls, no follow-up." She let the spreadsheet linger just long enough for the committee to feel the emptiness in every line. The government lost track of over 100 children, and within 72 hours, this, she pointed to the video still of shredders, was the cleanup operation. Trump shifted, not in defiance, in discomfort. His leg bounced beneath the desk. His jaw tightened. But still, he didn't speak. "Do you know what it means to lose 112 children?" Jasmine continued, voice soft but unwavering. "That's not negligence. That's erasure." She stepped toward the screen again and tapped the edge gently, as if to awaken something. A new document appeared, a faded ICE internal memo titled Post-Closure Disposal Protocol. No signature, just a checklist. Item 1, personnel files. Item 2, equipment inventory. Item 3, detainee logbooks. Beside that final line, the checkbox was marked with an X, and beside it, the handwritten note. "All cleared, vault emptied." Jasmine circled the phrase. They didn't just empty rooms, they emptied records, emptied names, emptied futures. Her voice faltered, just for a second, just enough to sound human again. Lucia's name made it to the invoice, but these 112, they didn't even get that. They were coded, they were tagged, and then they were cleared. No one could look away. Even the C-SPAN producer left the wide shot to zoom in on Jasmine's eyes. And what the country saw there wasn't anger. It was grief, weaponized. Jasmine walked back to her seat. Then slowly she reached for one final sheet of paper. A list, unofficial, compiled by volunteer immigration attorneys and whistleblowers like Elena Morales. The header read, "Unaccounted minors, Laredo 2020. There were 112 entries, only first names, no birth dates, some misspelled. Most had no surnames, but they were real. They had existed, and now they were gone. She placed the list on the evidence table. "Let the record reflect," she said quietly, "that these children were never released. They were never deported. They were never found. And now the documents that could have told us where they went are gone too." A man in the audience, likely a father, lowered his head and began to weep. Jasmine didn't ask the committee for outrage. She didn't shout for justice. She didn't need to. She simply said the one thing the room hadn't heard in an hour, a whisper, a fact, a requiem. "We didn't just lose children. We disappeared them." And the shredder, still humming on screen in that grainy footage, kept chewing long after the recording had ended. The room was quiet, but not with silence, with grief, the kind that curdled in the throat and wouldn't move. Jasmine let that ache linger, let the room sit in the gravity it had tried so hard to deny. Then she reached slowly into a velvet-lined envelope, not thick, not dramatic, just a single piece of paper, folded with the kind of precision reserved for things too dangerous to wrinkle. She placed it on the table in front of her, flattened the corners, then turned it around for the cameras. "This," she said, "is a check." The screen behind her lit up. A high-resolution scan, $348,000, dated April 14th, 2020, payable to UltraCorp Holding Account, signed by Mark Meadows. No caption was needed, no music, no pause. The number alone sucked the breath from the gallery. "It was issued," Jasmine continued, "one day after a 15-year-old boy named Mateo Alvarez was found unresponsive in cell 6C at the Laredo facility." She didn't embellish, she didn't flinch. She let the numbers say what no adjective could. The incident report labeled it unknown respiratory failure. The autopsy, inconclusive. The cell, no camera feed. The temperature, 89 degrees Fahrenheit. The bedding, mylar sheet and concrete. Ooh, Jasmine's voice dipped, lower than it had all day. Not out of weakness, but control. Each syllable carried like a scalpel. And the next morning before sunrise, $348,000 was wired to the contractor that operated that wing. The term came slowly, weighted, inevitable. Blood finance. Trump leaned forward at that, eyes narrowed. He shifted in his chair, looked to his counsel. One aide reached for a notepad, another checked their phone, but Jasmine didn't turn. She kept her focus on the check, on the ink that burned hotter than any flame. This wasn't hush money, it was reward, because buried in Ultra's internal ledger, she said, pulling out another document, is a bonus log. She tapped at the screen. A spreadsheet appeared. One entry, highlighted, line 6C, incident resolved, bonus released. Status, payment confirmed. A gasp broke through the gallery, not performative. Not planned, the kind that escaped before the heart could filter it. Jasmine turned slowly toward the panel. This child died in a locked cage, without medical attention, without a witness, without dignity. And the next day, someone got paid. She let it settle, let the cold arithmetic do its quiet devastation. Then she posed the question that no one wanted to answer. "What do you call it?" she asked, "when death is followed not by inquiry, but by deposit?" No one answered. The silence was already screaming. Trump's lawyer cleared his throat, tried to break the spell. "This isn't proof of causation," he mumbled. "It's routine post-contract payment." Jasmine didn't even turn. "Routine?" she said. "Then tell me how many children must die for a payment to no longer be considered standard." She clicked again. A new document appeared. UltraCorp memo, internal use only. Subject, death incident protocol, financial timing. Jasmine read aloud, quote, "In the event of unplanned fatality within detention infrastructure, maintain payment schedule to avoid triggering audit review. Use expedited financial pipeline." No one gasped now. The oxygen had been sucked out of the room. They didn't panic when a child died, she said. They panicked at the thought of a delay in payment. She took a breath, not to compose herself, but to sharpen the blade. Mateo Alvarez's body was buried 3 days after his death. His mother was notified 7 days after that. But the check, it cleared in under 36 hours. Trump slammed a palm on the table. Finally, something audible. "You don't know what happened in that cell?" he barked. "You weren't there. You don't get to make this accusation without proof." Jasmine turned, calm as snowfall. "I don't need to know what happened inside the cell, Mr. Trump. I know what happened after." She gestured to the check, the memo, the ledger, the price tag. "And what happened after," she said, "was profit." She leaned forward. "You want to talk about lack of evidence? You signed off on a contract that guaranteed payment regardless of condition. Children could be moved, starved, or silenced, and the checks still arrived." Trump didn't speak. His eyes locked on the screen where the check remained frozen. Jasmine placed the physical copy back into the evidence sleeve, sealed it, then slid it toward the committee. "Let it enter the record," she said, "as proof of a transaction and consequence. No dramatics, just paper, ink, and a boy named Mateo." She looked back at the audience now, not the lawmakers, not the cameras, the people, the mothers, the veterans, the children too young to understand but too present to forget. "This isn't about politics. This is about what a government does when it learns that death is cheaper than reform." And behind her, the check sat glowing beneath the Capitol lights, signed, sealed, and soaked in silence. Jasmine didn't sit, not yet. The weight of what had just been revealed was still unfolding across the chamber, like slow spreading smoke. And she wasn't finished. Not until she tore away the last thread of plausible deniability, one word at a time. She reached into a side folder and pulled out a printed email. One page, no branding, just black and white ink from a personal inbox labeled opsadmin@ultracorp.net. "Let the record now reflect," she said, holding the page above the desk, "that we've moved beyond negligence, beyond cruelty, beyond even corruption." She turned the email to the camera. This is how they spoke about children, when they thought no one would ever hear it. She began to read. Subject, monthly occupancy metrics, asset reporting. "We've surpassed projections in Q2 thanks to increased field apprehensions. Continue optimizing retention from, especially for N2 and T3 brackets. High-yield assets like sibling units should be prioritized in pipeline. Reminder, children equal assets. Maximize per capita margin before DOJ audit window closes." She didn't stop. Follow-up thread, same sender. "Per CFO guidance, do not list minors as detainees in internal reports. Use asset coding matrix for Q4 reporting to align with tax structure under private holding. Mark high risk as depreciating units." The word hung there, frozen in the air like a curse. Depreciating units. A human child, treated as a liability, a write-down, a risk factor on a balance sheet. Jasmine's voice dropped. They weren't just confined, they were commodified. Children weren't protected, they were leveraged. Trump shifted again, but this time it wasn't anger. It was exposure. His jaw clenched, but his hands stopped moving. Even he could feel it now, the script slipping out of his grip. Jasmine held up a page from an internal financial deck titled Quarterly Asset Yield Performance. The slide showed color-coded bars representing minors by age group and stay duration. There were labels, N2, toddlers, 3-6 weighers, high retention yield, and T3, and teens, 13 to 17, stable intake, low exit volatility, S1, sibling on clusters, bonus eligible. Jasmine didn't look away. She made sure they saw it, all of it. These aren't detention statistics. These are portfolio reviews. She clicked, revealing the next slide from the leaked deck, a section titled Asset Efficiency versus Cost of Care. The graph showed a point where the cost of medical attention exceeded projected margin, marked with a red line labeled Threshold. Recommend termination or transfer. A sound emerged from the back row. Not a gasp, not a scream, just a single choked breath from someone who had just seen their worst fears confirmed. They didn't just track children, Jasmine said. They calculated their break-even point. She circled the phrase on the graph. Her pen tapped once against the screen. Recommend termination. The room went still again, but this time it wasn't from shock. It was from understanding. The kind that doesn't come from a headline or a tweet, but from something colder, darker, quieter. Recognition. Jasmine walked slowly back to the center microphone, document still in hand. Her eyes found the committee chair, then the panel, then the cameras. This was never about overcrowding, never about national security. This was about monetization. Children became inventory, fear became currency, and the system didn't fail. It performed exactly as designed. She held up a redacted payroll ledger from UltraCorp's executive board. Highlighted entries showed quarterly bonuses tied not to employee performance, but to occupancy consistency, retention window averages, and Q1 yield per asset group. The total bonus pool exceeded 8.4 million, distributed across 6 names. 4 of them, Jasmine noted aloud, were contributors to the 2020 Trump campaign. You want to talk about corruption? She said. Fine, let's start with the ledger, because numbers don't lie, but people do. Behind her, the screen flickered once more. A final slide. Asset class, N2 average. Stay, 13.4 days. Total revenue, $14,018 per child. In total count, 3,126. And there it was, each one just a number, each one just a cell in a spreadsheet. But each one, somewhere out there, had once whispered for their mother through a chain-link fence, had once reached for a hand that never came, had once cried in a language no accountant could translate. Jasmine turned off the projector, slowly, deliberately. Darkness settled over the screen like a veil. She returned to the mic one last time. They called them assets. We were supposed to call them collateral. But today, let's call them what they are. Children. She sat, and for the first time, no one in the chamber made a sound. Because no one in that room, not even the guilty, could pretend anymore that this was just policy. This was business. And business for a time had been very, very good. But business, especially when soaked in blood, has fingerprints. And Jasmine Crockett had come to show exactly whose hands were on the levers. The screen behind her came back to life, this time with no warning. No preamble, just a cold, stark graphic, an organizational chart. Boxes upon boxes, clean white with black outlines, branching downward like a corporate family tree. At the top, UltraCorp Holdings. Beneath it, 4 shell companies, one layered beneath the next, names like Sablestone Logistics, Unified Solutions LLC, White Wing Investments. And at the very bottom, in a blood-red frame, Trump Jr. Strategic Development LLC. Jasmine stood again, calm, measured, no flair. Her voice was lower now, deadlier. You want to talk about the swamp? Let's start here. Let's talk about the pipelines that didn't carry water. But children. Let's talk about shell companies built not to protect people, but to hide profit. And let's talk, she said, pointing directly to the red frame box, about how this wasn't just government negligence. This was family business. The room stirred. Lawmakers leaned forward. Phones were gripped tighter. Some aides froze mid-typing. They weren't expecting this. UltraCorp was never just a contractor, Jasmine said. It was a front, one designed to funnel taxpayer dollars through layers of protection and into private pockets. But not just any pockets, not strangers, not unknown profiteers, family. She clicked the remote again. The chart zoomed in, unraveling the connections. Sablestone Logistics had been registered in Delaware with no listed employees, but had received $94 million on ICE infrastructure contracts between 2018 and 2020. Its ownership? Masked behind 2 shell corporations, both linked to White Wing Investments, which in turn was owned by a private equity firm partially registered in the Cayman Islands. And sitting on the board of that equity firm? Donald Trump Jr. Jasmine turned to the room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. This wasn't a coincidence. This was construction. Deliberate, methodical, and designed to make sure that every time a child was detained, someone named Trump got a little richer. Trump's eyes flared, not in shock but in recognition. He knew this thread, and now it had been pulled in front of 40 million viewers. Jasmine flipped the next slide, a scanned email. Subject, Retention Expansion Strategy, Southwest Region, sent from junior.trump@tstrategicdev.com, dated October 14th, 2019. Excerpted text highlighted on screen. Expedite modular build-outs at Texas and Arizona sites. Retention average holding steady at 14 plus nights. Projected ROI looks strong. Push for bundled facility contracts to reduce exposure. This is working. This is working. 3 words that now sounded like acid in the air. Jasmine took one step forward. It worked all right. Modular cages, bonus programs, shredded records, missing children, a $527 million revenue stream built on suffering. And who sat on the top of that ladder? Not just a president, his son. She looked directly at Trump. This wasn't a scandal. It was a succession plan. He opened his mouth but said nothing. One of his attorneys leaned over, whispered, then stopped, knowing no legal spin would survive that kind of exposure. Jasmine continued. In that email, Don Jr. refers to the children as holding assets. He talks about profit margins, facility clustering, federal cover. Not once does he use the word child. Not once does he say the word human. She tapped the screen. Because in this business model, humanity was a liability. The next slide appeared, an image of a memo from Unified Solutions to White Wing's parent board. It showed projected quarterly earnings based on ICE occupancy caps and proposed new facility builds. Jasmine read aloud, projected yield increase of 18.4% upon introduction of family unit holding centers. High-cap sibling units show strong long-term growth potential. Political optics manageable. Risk offset by executive access. Executive access. Access to the presidency, to influence, to silence. Jasmine turned back to the committee. When a father signs the contracts and a son receives the payments and children fill the beds in between, that's not corruption. That's inheritance. The sentence cracked through the chamber like a lightning strike. One senator dropped his pen, another quietly stood and walked out. Don't talk to me about border crises, Jasmine said. Talk to me about corporate legacy, because these weren't just contracts. These were trust funds. These were business plans passed down from father to son, with a side of suffering. She let the screen go dark again. One final sentence burned into its center in white on black. Trump Gr. Strategic Development in LLC. 146,000 received. Jasmine took her seat, and the family name, once shouted from gold towers, now lay in a room filled with silence, shredded records, and 1,000 echoes of crying children no one had planned to find. It happened without warning, no preamble, no committee cue. A chair slid back, slowly, heavily. One of the few sounds that hadn't been rehearsed, briefed, or planned in this chamber. It wasn't a journalist. It wasn't a protester. It wasn't a Democrat. It was Senator Michael Reyes. The room turned before he even began to speak. Retired 3-star general, Republican of Arizona, son of Mexican immigrants, decorated in Afghanistan, a man known more for his silence than his speeches. For 30 years, he had sat on the quiet side of history, voting his line, defending his party, avoiding headlines. But now he stood. He didn't look at Jasmine, not at first. He looked down at the evidence tray, the file folder still open, the single check glowing beneath the gallery lights. Then he turned to face his own side of the chamber, the Republican seats that suddenly felt a little colder. His voice was calm, almost private, but in a room that had forgotten how to breathe, every word cracked like thunder. I can't defend cages in K. Not today. The words didn't ripple, they detonated. For a moment, no one reacted. Even Trump remained perfectly still, lips pursed like he'd swallowed battery acid. A few aides leaned in, unsure if they'd heard what they thought they heard. The gallery was frozen until the weight of it landed, and suddenly, every camera in the room pivoted in unison, catching the lone man standing. Reyes didn't waver. He looked straight ahead. His next words weren't shouted. They were delivered like a confession, heavy with cost. I wore a uniform for this country. I buried men who believed in its better nature. And I've spent my career convincing myself that compromise was patriotism. But this, he gestured toward the black screen, this is not compromise. This is not oversight. This is a system designed to disappear children while enriching men who wear their names in gold. He turned now to Jasmine, eyes steady. Congresswoman Crockett, I don't agree with everything you say, but today I heard the voices I've ignored for too long. The ones that don't speak English, the ones that come through steel vents at night, the ones we called noise. The audience, still stunned, barely dared to exhale. On Trump's side of the chamber, staffers exchanged panicked glances. One reached for a phone, whispered something urgent into a headset, but no interruption came, because something larger had shifted. Reyes spoke again. I didn't come here to turn on my party. I came here because I believe in the soul of this country, and you do not protect a nation's soul by selling its children to the highest bidder. A murmur moved through the Republican seats like a fracture racing under the surface. Subtle but irreversible. Jasmine watched silently, her face unreadable, but her eyes, sharp as ever, locked on Reyes, not in victory, but in solidarity. Reyes faced forward once more. If we can't draw the line at child profit models, then we are no longer lawmakers. We are accessories. And with that, he did something few had expected from anyone that day. He walked across the aisle, one step, two, and then stood behind Jasmine Crockett's desk, silent, unwavering. The room imploded, not with noise, but with motion. Phones lit up like a constellation of fire. C-SPAN's feeds zoomed. Reporters typed faster than they could breathe. One aide mouthed, "Oh my God," into his sleeve. And Trump, he leaned back, stared at Reyes like he'd watched a brick fall from the foundation. And maybe he had, because in that moment, one man cracked the dam. And you don't need an earthquake to flood a room. Just a single shift in weight at the right fault line. Reyes looked at the chairman now, calm as a man who had just burned his last bridge and found peace in the ashes. I request that the record reflect my full support for a federal criminal investigation into these contracts and a temporary suspension of all IC funding connected to UltraCorp or its affiliates. No one argued. No one rebutted. Because for the first time, the silence wasn't weaponized, Ed. It was listening. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't move. She just looked up, eyes wet, shoulders square, not victorious, vindicated. Because a man had just crossed the aisle. And when the first man does, the next are never far behind. She waited until the room had quieted again, not silenced by horror, but calmed by reckoning. The kind of quiet that follows after someone says the truth aloud, and you realize you can't put it back in the bottle. Then Jasmine opened a small manila envelope. It wasn't thick. It didn't come with a logo or a watermark. It had no classification markings or security clearance labels. Inside it was a single folded sheet of lined paper, the edges crumpled, smudged with graphite. She held it in both hands like something sacred. I want to read something into the record, she said softly. It wasn't submitted by a law firm, or a whistleblower, or a senator. It was found in the corner of a bush at the Mesquite detention facility in 2020, tucked inside a pair of rolled-up socks. She unfolded it carefully. The paper barely held its own weight. You could still see the faint outline of where it had once been pressed beneath a bare heel. It was written in pencil, in Spanish, by a little girl named Marielle, age 7. She was held for 22 days. She had no lawyer. She had no translator. But she had a pencil. Jasmine looked up, and this is what she wrote. She took a breath, a pause, the kind you don't rush, the kind that tells you you're about to walk through someone else's pain, and you'd better not drag your feet. I'm cold. I want my shoes back. The light is always on. There is no time here. I don't know if it's Monday. Tell my sister I didn't forget her. She stopped, not because she forgot the rest, but because the room needed that moment, to sit in it, to feel how long those lines had waited to be heard. A soft sound cracked from the gallery. One sniffle, then another. Someone covered their mouth to stop the sob from escaping. A Capitol police officer turned away, blinking rapidly. Jasmine continued, "Please tell someone I am here. Please tell someone I didn't do bad. Please give me my shoes." That was it. No signature, no date. Just a child's plea pressed into a piece of notebook paper and forgotten in a corner. No stamp, no envelope, no hope it would ever be read. Until now. Jasmine placed the letter on the desk in front of her. She didn't speak for a few seconds. And in that silence, the country cracked open. "You want to talk about security?" she said at last. "Then explain why a child thought she had to earn back her shoes." She looked directly at Trump. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't ask for a trial. She didn't even ask for her mother. She asked for time, for a day of the week, for Monday, so she could feel human again. Trump didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't look away, and that, Jasmine said later, was the most chilling thing of all. This letter doesn't accuse anyone. It doesn't name names. It doesn't ask for punishment. It simply exists. And that alone, she said, is an indictment more powerful than any headline. She turned to the committee now, slowly, deliberately. We can debate policy all day, budgets, borders, jurisdiction. But if we cannot agree that a child asking for shoes is not a threat to this country, then we are already lost. Someone stood in the gallery, a nurse, a woman with tears streaming down her face, clutching a picture of her own daughter. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She just stood. Others began to rise too, one by one, row by row, silent, still, bearing witness. This little girl didn't write a demand, Jasmine said. She wrote a reminder that somewhere inside the calculus of cages and contracts, she was still here, still cold, still barefoot. She stepped back and placed the letter face up for the cameras. Let the record show that a 7-year-old girl in a metal cage had more humanity than half the executives who built it. Trump didn't move. And that, Jasmine knew, was not just a failure. It was the most dangerous silence of all. Because even in the face of a child's pencil-scrawled cry, his face remained stone, and his conscience missing. The room should have stayed in mourning. That's what tradition demanded, that after a letter like that, after a silence like that, everyone would bow their heads, offer soft apologies to history, and adjourn. But Jasmine didn't come for tradition. She came for justice. She rose again, slow, composed, eyes calm but burning, and walked to the center mic. The room felt smaller now, tighter, like time itself was holding its breath. "Mr. Chairman," she said, "I wish to submit House Resolution 1479 to immediate floor vote." A ripple of motion surged through the dais. Brows lifted, heads turned. A murmur spilled through the gallery. House Resolution 1479. The bill had existed in whispers, rumors, redacted memos, but now it was real. Jasmine continued. H.R. 1479 calls for the appointment of a special independent counsel to investigate criminal misconduct, corporate collusion, and human rights violations tied to federal migrant detention contracts from 2018 to 21, including but not limited to evidence involving executive branches, contractors, and named individuals, including the sitting witness, Donald John Trump. The words hit like flint, and somewhere beneath them, the fuse caught flame. Trump slammed his palm on the desk so hard his microphone cracked. "This is revenge," he shouted. "This is political theater. You think you can destroy me with lies and sob stories? I built this country's wall. I protected. You profited," Jasmine said. She didn't yell. She didn't blink. She simply looked at him the way a courtroom looks at a guilty man who won't stop talking. "You turned children into invoices. You signed off on cages, padded contracts, and bonus incentives tied to suffering. That's not policy. That's criminal enterprise." Trump rose, red-faced, breathing heavy. "You don't have the votes." She turned to him, one final time. "Then start running." The gallery gasped. Someone clapped. A gavel slammed. The chairman cleared his throat and glanced around the committee. Per special floor motion and with the support of emergency bipartisan quorum, House Resolution 1479 moves to immediate vote. All members, cast your roll call. The screen behind Jasmine flickered once more. One by one, names and votes illuminated. Yes, yes, no, yes, no, yes. And then a pause. The final vote came from the last seat on the right, Senator Doyle, Republican of Kansas. For hours, he'd sat silent, stoic, arms crossed. Now he looked at Jasmine, then at Trump, then down at his voting terminal. Yes, a chime echoed. The final tally appeared. 72 AIs, 68 no's. The chamber exploded, not in chaos, not in protest, but in something more shocking. Applause. Jasmine didn't join it. She simply closed the folder in front of her, slow and quiet, like the end of a sermon no one expected to hear, but would never forget. Trump slumped back into his chair, the fire in his eyes gone, replaced by calculation and something else, fear. Not the kind that comes from being shouted at, the kind that comes when the room stops shouting entirely. Because justice wasn't coming with sirens. It was coming like a whisper in a hallway, a vote in a box, a paper trail that couldn't be shredded fast enough. A camera caught Jasmine's face in close-up, not smiling, not smug, just resolute. And then the screen cut to black. One final sentence faded in. Justice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just waits long enough to be voted through. The fuse was lit, and America was watching. In the end, it wasn't the documents or the data or even the dead silence that changed history. It was the courage to name what others refused to see. Children treated as cost, pain traded as profit, and truth buried beneath signatures. Justice, as it turns out, isn't loud. It's patient, it's stubborn, and it lives inside anyone brave enough to say, "This is not who we are." Because nations don't fall when monsters rise. They fall when good people sit still. So stand, even if your voice shakes. Especially then. If this story made your chest tighten, your eyes burn, or your breath kitch, don't scroll past that feeling. Sit with it. Share it. Let it rattle the silence someone else is still living through. Like, comment, and send it to one person who still believes a child's cry should echo louder than a campaign speech. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where every whisper of truth becomes a reckoning. Hit the bell because what comes next doesn't play nice. This is a fictional dramatization built on the bones of real injustice and the bravery of those who refuse to look away. Any resemblance to actual people or events is either pure coincidence or exactly the point. Thanks for watching. Remember, justice isn't soft, it isn't quiet, it's us, demanding better. This is Harrison Stories.